According to Dr. Julianna Slattery, many Christian people today find their sense of self-worth behind the masks of their accomplishments, their appearance, their intelligence, their education, even their work in the church. Now, I reckon we could broaden the conversation up and say many of us, no matter what your faith is, find our sense of self-worth behind those kinds of masks: accomplishment, appearance, intelligence, education. She argues, though, those masks actually separate us from others, from ourselves, and from God. She's with us in the studio now, a Christian psychologist and author of Beyond the Masquerade, Unveiling the Authentic You. Julie, welcome to Australia and welcome to Open House.
Thanks, it's good to be here.
Yeah, you were saying before that you're flying all around the place. You don't even know which city you're in now. How long have you been in Australia now?
I've been here for about a week now.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I hope we're making you warm and welcome.
Yeah, it's definitely welcome for sure. I'm finding the further south I go, the colder it gets, which is the opposite from the States.
Yes. Emotional warmth is where I was going. Certainly not physical warmth right now. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's talk about self-esteem. Let's talk about self-concept and self-image. You as a psychologist obviously would be dealing with these issues all the time with people coming through your practice, and of course with your association with Focus on the Family as well. Now let's talk about masks first, because we wear these masks to present obviously some sort of portrayal of ourselves to others that we think, they're going to like.
Right, exactly. And it starts out when we're so young, when you realize that there's something about you that's not quite right, whether it's you have bad thoughts or you get in trouble or whatever it might be, you're not good at something. You learn from the time you're a little kid, and certainly in adolescence it gets worse, that you've got to pretend to be somebody that you're not. You have to put your best foot forward in order to be accepted in the world, really.
And so we put masks on, like
Well,
accomplishment.
Yeah, accomplishment could be one. Even somebody that's maybe, for example, really friendly all the time, always has to have a happy face on. It could be somebody who avoids conflict and has to get along with everyone and make everybody happy. There's tons of masks. Some people have a real rough mask. They can be real upfront and abrupt and confrontational because they don't want to feel vulnerable, so they take control of every conversation. So there's really endless amounts of masks. I identify a few in particular in the book, but we just hide. That's the bottom line. Is there
a really common mask for men and a common mask for women?
I don't know that there's a common for each. I think there are subcategories. And I think guys tend to hide behind their work more, maybe be more macho or maybe humor, whereas women tend to use relationships as masks.
Okay, now what does a mask do to us?
Well, what it really does, bottom line, is it distorts truth. If I present a mask to you that I've got my life together and I'm so accomplished and things like that, I don't want you to see the truth of who I really am, that I have insecurities, that I have doubts, that I'm not always sure what I'm doing. And I will start to believe that myself. It distorts not only the truth that you see in me, but it distorts the truth that I see around me, the way I even see myself. So every time you put a mask on, you're compromising truth in order to have somebody accept kind of a false version of who you are.
And like you said, this can start from childhood, so you might have been wearing that mask for a lot of years.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I have 3 kids, and I know I have to be really careful. I think all parents do, that I don't communicate to my kids, I love you when you get good grades, I love you when you're well behaved, because that just emphasizes you have to be somebody that you're not in order for me to approve of you and love you.
Okay, that leads then to this notion of the authentic self, who we really are.
Yeah.
Which is almost a bottomless pit, because sometimes we just don't know who we are, particularly if we've been wearing a mask for a long time.
That's true. Yeah, some people have a really hard time getting that mask off because there's a fear of, well, for example, if I don't succeed at work, if people don't see me as the perfect mom or whatever your mask might be, you're not sure who you really are. Who am I? I've been spending 20, 30 years keeping up sort of this facade, and that I always have it together. Who am I if I let that go? And that can be very frightening.
Some people will know the work of the UK comedian and poet Adrian Plass, and his biography is an absolute case example of this. He actually said he had built up this little structure around himself to protect himself from the world, to make other people think that he was okay, and inside he was absolutely crumbling.
Yeah. And
then in his 30s, he actually had a breakdown, and it was during that time that he wrote his most popular book, The Sacred Diary of Adrian Plass, aged 37 3/4, I think it was called. And it was huge because he was finally able to be authentic and to just simply write as is. But you don't want to wait until a breakdown happens, until you actually are forced to see yourself as you truly, truly are. So when people come into your counselling practice, and you diagnose, you recognize that they're wearing the masks. Where do you start to help them unwrap that and find out who they really are?
Well, people come to counseling because they're in some sort of pain. Very few people come to counseling just because they want to grow. They come because their marriage is breaking up. They come because they're depressed or they're dealing with panic attacks or something like that. And usually that's a crack in a mask. If I have a mask, for example, of a really strong Christian, moral person, and then all of a sudden my marriage starts to break apart and I'm separated from my husband, people are going to know that I'm struggling with something and I don't want them to know that. And so I come to counseling to fix the marriage. So what you start to do is you start to ask the deeper questions about what if your marriage does fall apart? Or what if your child does die through this? Or whatever the fear is, do you really think you'll be okay? And the answer to that question is usually no, because I don't know who I am besides this role or this mask. And so really when you're in pain is the best time to start asking that question, because you're in pain because your mask doesn't work anymore. And that's the time where we're really doing some soul searching and ready to accept a truth that other times in life we're not.
Maybe not.
Yeah.
It says open house across the nation. Psychologist Dr. Julie Slattery is with us, author of Beyond the Masquerade, Unveiling the Authentic You. She's been brought out to Australia by Focus on the Family. Okay, so where do you start, though? How do you find out who you really are?
Well, I think, first of all, at some level, we know who we really are. But the problem is that there's some negative truth there that we don't want to accept. For me to really understand who I am, I have to realize that in my heart of hearts, I am a sinful, broken person. I don't always have the best motives. I have bad thoughts. I have selfish thoughts. I'm all about me. I can be very proud. And if I can't admit that I'm really a broken, selfish person that has some good there too, but that I'm in need of something that I can't provide for myself, then I can't be authentic. And that's where the message of the gospel of Jesus Christ comes in. When I start to realize I'm a broken, sinful person, and I can say that and know that, yeah, God agrees with that. Of course you're a broken, sinful person. That's why Jesus died, because you can't save yourself. There's great hope in that. But again, I think we resist that. So many people are defensive whenever, for example, they fight with their spouse. I can't be the one that's wrong. You have to be the one that's wrong, because we don't want to admit the fact that we're sinful. And once you get past the point of having to defend that, you can just admit it.
It's actually quite liberating,
It
isn't
is.
it? Yeah.
I mean, think of all the energy you spend all day. The average person probably spends 70% of their energy pretending to themselves and to other people that they're not who they really are. And when you can finally let go of that, it's incredibly liberating.
Okay, so we come to that point where we recognize, all right, I'm broken, I'm sinful, I'm selfish. So often I'm just simply out there to make sure everybody thinks I'm great, including my spouse if I'm fighting with them, and that I'm right.
Yep.
Second point. What do you do after that?
I think you've got to have an encounter with God, and a lot of this is an encounter with other people too. You know, some people get stuck in that realization that, wow, I'm just a creep, basically. I struggle with things. I can't get over an addiction. I can't get over being petty, that sort of thing. And they get depressed, or kind of have this like emo culture now where you live in that despondency. If you don't have an encounter with a God that can save you from that, you're in a bad position. And so really that brokenness has to lead you not to rebuilding a new mask or not to depression, but to say, some of those existential questions. What is life about? God, are you real? Can you really love me in the state that I'm in? I was talking to a lady in a church this morning, and she was just crying after we had done some ministry there. And she just said, I'm a mess. She was sobbing. And at one level, I can just see that the Lord is looking down going, great, because I take messes. I came to heal the sick and the broken, not the people who think they've got it all together.
That's right.
And so that's the stage of healing. And some of that's played out in relationship. I mean, when you can go to your spouse then and admit with humility, I have wronged you, or I struggle here, or please forgive me. And you receive forgiveness from another person, whether it's your child, your spouse, your parents, your coworker, whoever it might be. There's something really healing in that. Admitting where you're weak and being being received with love in that.
One of my favorite verses in the Bible is out of the second book of Corinthians in the 3rd chapter, and it talks about we with unveiled faces behold God's glory, and we are being transformed into the image of Jesus, my paraphrase. That's where the change happens, doesn't it? Is actually when we have unveiled faces, faces that are free to actually look at God and actually have him enter our lives, transform us by the power of his Spirit after what Jesus did on the cross. Then he starts to rework our personality and rework our identity.
Absolutely. There's an account in the book of Isaiah where the prophet Isaiah has a vision of seeing God in all of his glory. I mean, he's overwhelmed by it. And the first thing Isaiah says is, whoa. He says, I am undone because I'm a man of unclean lips, and I live among people of unclean lips. And essentially what he's saying when he sees God's glory is, wow, I see how broken I am. And it's only then that in his vision, God comes and an angel touches his lips and purifies him and then commissions him, go out and change the world. And when we have that encounter, when we see God, when you see the holiness of God, you will see the brokenness of yourself. And if you just stay in that brokenness, again, you'll get depressed. But if you can receive the forgiveness of God and that change that you're talking about of who you are and how much the Lord loves you, then you've got a new life waiting in front of you.
And to be called a child of God, that's what another passage in the Bible talks about, that we are actually called children of God when that actually happens. I mean, that's a profound idea when it comes to our sense of identity.
Yeah, not just a child, but a friend of God. It's amazing. But again, you got to accept the bad truth and the good truth together. And when we deny the bad truth, we can't receive the good truth of how much God really loves us.
Yes. So what's your take on the idea of self-esteem?
Well, I think self-esteem is a real thing, but I think it's a spiritual problem. And we're defining it as an emotional problem. And when you try to solve a spiritual problem in an emotional way, try to make somebody feel good about themselves, trying to tell them nice things about themselves, you're not really addressing what's wrong. The problem with self-esteem, everyone's self-esteem problem is that we were made for a specific function. We were made to have communion with God. I use the example of a light bulb. Like, what good is a light bulb if there's no electricity? And you might as well just throw it in the trash because it's good for nothing. And so we were made to be plugged into God, but we're born without electricity. We're born completely separate from that person. And so people who never connect to God again, in some ways spend their whole life searching for, well, then what's my purpose? And they make something up and they try as hard as they can to make life meaningful. But until you understand that you are created for relationship with God, self-esteem is going to be an endless search. And as soon as you realize it's a spiritual problem, I can't solve it in myself, I have to go to God to solve that problem, then you see people grow and you see people love the Lord and find so much purpose. They really forget about themselves.
I remember it being put somehow, it was a counseling book that I was reading, and I remember the guy saying, we want to resolve our personal issues to the point where we can forget about ourselves.
Yeah.
Something along those lines. There's a time to focus on your issues and getting yourself straightened out. Yes, you've got to focus on yourself for a period of time, to the point where you can forget about yourself and then love people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
St. Augustine said something like this. He said there are really two kinds of love. The love of self unto the forgetfulness of God, and the love of God unto the forgetfulness of self. And I can't say it any more profoundly than he did.
Yes. Practically speaking, then, somebody goes through all those steps and they recognize then that they're loved by God and their whole identity can be changed and transformed. How can we stop putting the masks back on again, particularly when we might have had years putting those masks on?
Yeah, there's always a temptation. And, since I wrote Beyond the Masquerade a few years ago, and the Lord does heart surgery on me all the time, he reveals new masks that I didn't even know were there. And, I hate 3-step things where, okay, first do this, then do this, because this is spiritual growth you can't put into a formula. The only thing we know to do is seek the Lord with all of our heart. And when you do that, when you're constantly seeking Him and you're open to learning from Him and His Spirit working in your life, He's going to reveal those things. So I think anything, self-esteem, spiritual growth, all these things we can make too formulaic. First you do this, and then that. And that just becomes another mask. We've got a lot of Christians running around with the Christian mask, but they're not being authentic. They're not being honest. But if we can keep our eyes on Jesus and we can keep seeking him, then those masks aren't going to grow back.
And you mean the authentic in terms of the humility, don't you? Because you can actually be authentic in terms of all your themes, all your ideas and thoughts about other people. I'm just being authentic. I really hate the way you've said that. I really hate the way you look today.
Well, you know what? That's a good point, but there's a difference between like transparent and authentic, I think. I think sometimes people use the mask of authenticity. Like, I'm just going to tell you exactly what I think.
Yeah. This is me. This is who I am. I tell it like it is.
But you know what? Let me tell you like it is. That's a real jerk. It's somebody who's only focused on themselves and their own opinion. Yeah. And you're right. It really is rooted in humility, in seeing people, seeing ourselves the way God sees them.
All right. Well, lovely to have you here. Enjoy the rest of your time in Australia.
Well, thanks. I'm loving it.
Yeah, absolutely. Julie Slattery, psychologist and author of a number of books, including Beyond the Masquerade, Unveiling the Authentic You, brought out to Australia by Focus on the Family.